I'm going to start today with a quote from Alexander Lowen, who is one of the pioneers of breathwork and coming into the body and uncovering what it holds. And the quote is, "A person who doesn't breathe deeply reduces the life of their body. If they don't move freely, they restrict the life of their body. And if their self-expression is constricted, they limit the life of their body." I think it's a nice place to start for episode 3 of Ciorcal Conversations, which is coming to you from Morocco. I'm in a place called Tamarack for 4 nights, and it's absolutely stunning. It's such an incredible place. The locals are incredibly friendly, the food is really good. It's obviously quite sunny, which is nice as well, and with Ciorcal Conversations being like set outside in different environments, I wanted to take this opportunity to record an episode here. I'm sitting on the terrace of my accommodation at the moment, and yeah, I feel very grateful. I started the episode today with a quote from Lowen because I want to speak about breathwork specifically today. In the quote, he mentioned that a person who doesn't breathe deeply restricts the life in their body, and to me, breathwork is a lot more than just like a modality, a way to handle stress. It's a way of being. If you think about Eastern culture, they speak about chi or prana as life force energy, and in India, the prana is the breath. It's the life force of our body. And when I think about the breath, I don't just think about it as these tools that we have. I think about it as my way of being. My breath can tell me so much about what's happening in my body, and in turn what's happening in my world. And I think that's easiest explained by giving you an introduction as to how I see breathwork. For me, breathwork has 2 main areas. The first one is breath awareness, and what breath awareness is by simply checking in on your breath and noticing your breath, how it is, without trying to change it, you can get a sense of what's happening in your body. And the breath is the first thing we do when we come into this world. It's the last thing we do before we leave. We take over 20,000 breaths a day, yet so few of us are actually aware, and I put myself in this, or have put myself in this in the past. So few of us are aware of what's actually happening with our breath and what that can tell us about how we're feeling in our bodies. On average, we take around 12 to 20 breaths a minute. Towards the upper end, around like 15 to 20, is a clear sign that your body is in stress mode. It's in sympathetic fight or flight mode. And the reason why that's important is if internally, without even knowing, you're in a stress state, that is going to reflect how you show up in your outer world, in your relationships, in your work. When you try to relax, if you're actually able to chill out, or if you still feel on edge. And that was me for so long. Like every time I try and take a break, I would just feel this sense of stress building. And it wasn't that the stress wasn't there beforehand. It's just that when I try to slow down, that's when you notice it. I mentioned 12 to 20 breaths is on average. Breath awareness starts with just noticing how your breath is. So over the course of a minute, maybe set a timer and see how many breaths you take without trying to change it. Noticing if your breath is long and smooth, or if it's short and stunted. Where is the breath going to in your body? Is it coming down into the belly, or is it up high in the neck here? For years, I was breathing to about here. And we have a lot of accessory breathing muscles around this area in our neck and at the top of our chest. And for me, they were becoming tighter and tighter because they were doing more and more work. I wasn't breathing fully. I didn't know what breathing fully meant. And when I started to check in on my breath more, just like day to day, noticing how my breath was, it gave me the opportunity to see the state my body was in. And what I found was I was constantly stressed. Every time I checked in on my breath, I noticed it was really shallow. It was fast. It wasn't fluid. There was no flow to it. And when I look at what life looked like in those years, it was just this constant feeling of being on edge. This sense that something was going to happen, like braced for danger, even though there was no danger around. And that's where we begin with breath work, with breath awareness, just checking in to notice how your breath is, because it can tell you so much about how you're actually feeling in your body, and then off the back of that, how you're showing up in the world around you. So that's the first piece, is breath awareness. The second piece of breath work, if we think about two maybe branches of the breath work tree, is conscious breathing. So that's taking different breath practices and incorporating them into our lives to change our state. Because when we change our state, we can change the stories that we tell ourselves. It's one of the big quotes from me within the breathwork space, is that our story follows our state. The stories we tell ourselves, about the world around us, follow the state of our bodies or our nervous systems, and we can change that through the breath. The breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system that we can consciously control. We can't control our digestion, we can't consciously control our heart rate, but we do have control over our breath. And that's where the conscious breathing comes in. A lot of the practices that you may have seen me speak about, or maybe the practices that you've tried yourself, they would all fall into the conscious breathing category. We have essentially a toolbox of breathwork tools to use to bring about different physiological changes in the body. Conscious breathing is easiest explained through like a tiered system, and we'll start with the down-regulating practices, because that's typically where the majority of people need to start. The world we live in nowadays is so full-on and stimulating that we're all kind of living in this frantic fight or flight energy, what I described there, where it's like this sense of danger, there's something happening all the time. And to counteract that, down-regulating the nervous system is the best place to begin. The way that we do that is typically, like the simplest way we can do that is extending our exhale. But even before that, breathing through our nose. If you ask any breath worker or someone who's interested in breath work what the first step should be to improving the quality of your breath, they should tell you to breathe through your nose. Our mouths are only typically, or should typically only be used for eating and talking. There are over 50 benefits for breathing through your nose. I'm not going to list all of them here now, but just a couple. Increased oxygen uptake in the body, so like increased blood flow to the brain, which means you think far more clearer, is a big one. And then to build on that, breathing through our nose activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our like down regulation, rest and digest branch of the nervous system. And I mean, it's pretty clear why we would need more of that in our lives. If our lives are lived up here, to be able to bring ourselves down here and operate from this place of clarity, of calm, it's obviously going to have a positive knock-on effect on our lives. And we can do that by breathing through our noses. Best practice is 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. This is at rest now, or when you're at work, for example. If you're exercising, it's different. But just as a general rule, breathing in and out through your nose, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out, is a really, really great place to start. That's called coherent breathing, and you can do that as a daily practice. You can build that into your morning or your evening, but just as a rule, tuning into breathing in that way as you move through your day is a really good start point, and that would fit into our down-regulating practices. Other down-regulating practices include a 4-7-8 breath, which is 4 seconds in, 7 seconds hold, and 8 seconds exhale. And you'll notice that 4 seconds in versus 8 seconds out is an extended exhale. So the exhale is longer than the inhale. That's really important in terms of down-regulating the nervous system as well, because the longer our exhale is, the more our internal system picks up the messages that we are safe. It's safe to calm down, to relax. So that's where we begin, typically, with down-regulating breath practices. If we bring our awareness up to the top of this spectrum and think about up-regulating practices, Upregulating practices are designed to bring energy into a lethargic or a tired system. So maybe you've woken up in the morning and you're just feeling a little bit low on energy and you want to bring more energy in. That's when we lean on the upregulating practices, such as the Wim Hof method you may have heard of, or the breath of fire. And if we think about what it means to be upregulating, adding energy, it makes sense then that those types of practices are a lot faster. We're breathing a lot more heavily. We're having more of an influence on carbon dioxide levels in the body. So what's happening with the upregulating practices is the levels of carbon dioxide are dropping in the body, and this brings about this kind of energized, kind of lightheaded state that afterwards gives us this lift. So that's an example of where upregulating practices fit in. The one that I'm, I suppose, most interested in and work with in terms of facilitation the most with people lands in the balanced tier of breathwork. So we have down-regulating, up-regulating, and balanced. Think about down-regulating as like a chamomile tea, very calm. Up-regulating is like a coffee, balanced is like a water. And conscious connected breathwork, which is the style that I facilitate in my longer facilitations, lands in the balanced breath. The balanced breaths typically, definitely the longer styles, are centered around emotional integration. So coming into the body and meeting what the body has been holding on to, because emotions are stored in the body. And I think this ties in nicely to my entry point to breathwork around emotional regulation. I started doing breathwork about 2.5 years ago. A lot of those down-regulating practices, which I mentioned in the first episode, to bring calm into a chronically stressed nervous system. And then over time, as I started to settle and my body started to actually relax a bit more, I felt all this emotion start to come to the surface that I found difficult to be with. Like there was a lot of loneliness there, a lot of sadness, a lot of anger, and I didn't really know how to handle that. I used to talk about my feelings and that was helpful, but it only got me to a point, and I still had this like heaviness in my body and a lack of clarity in like who I was as a person. And like I said, my entry point to breathwork being emotional regulation, it was very much centered around meeting the emotions that I hadn't felt safe to feel up until around a year ago. And a mentor of mine sent on a really helpful framework for me to understand that initially. And it was that if we think about a circle, and then there's outer circles that form around this inner circle, we'll call the inner circle the core. And in our core, we are love and joy, expression. That's where we are at our core. When we come into this world, we're just this like raw, emotional being. We cry, we laugh, there's no filter. That's the core. When disconnection arises, or when a feeling presents itself to be felt, let's say we want to get angry, or we want to cry, or we want to just feel a feeling, the opportunity presents itself. And if we feel safe to feel the feeling, we'll feel it, we'll let it move through the body, and then we'll come back to our core. So if our core is here, that's the second layer, is the invitation to feel a feeling. If we don't feel safe to feel that feeling, that energy that's associated with the feeling, because emotions are just energy in motion, we get stuck in it and it gets held into our body because we haven't expressed it. The more and more that gets held, the more we build this emotional disconnection where we can't actually feel what's happening in our body. And particularly around the emotions that are harder to be with, like sadness or grief or anger, they're difficult to feel. They're not easy to be with. And so because our body is quite intuitive and it doesn't want us to feel these feelings that are hard to be with, it will start to build armoring, muscular, physical armoring in our body to protect us from feeling our feelings, which further pushes that disconnection. So if the core is in the middle, we have the emotional layer, the invitation to feel the feelings. If we don't feel the feelings, we then have the physical layer, which is the next one. A lot of like discomfort, tension in your muscles, pain in your body, that's pretty difficult to be with as well. Well, in my experience it was, and I'm sure if you're listening to this and your body feels very tense and tight, you'll feel the exact same, that it's a really difficult thing to navigate in your day-to-day life. To protect from that, we jump into our mind and we start to come up with rationalizations and judgments and spend all of our time up here, which disconnects us from what's happening from here down, all this pain that's in our body. So if we think about this work, it's starting to move back down through those layers, and conscious connected breathwork fits into that model because it helps us to meet the emotions that are underneath the surface. So if we think about the outer layer, which is spending all of our time up here, to step out of that, we come and meet the physical tension in our body first. So we start to soften the body. We'll use the breath to bring relaxation, to let the body just melt into the ground, to feel that sense of safety start to return in the body. Once we come through the physical layer, we start to meet the emotions that have been left unfelt. And if you've done conscious connected breathwork before, you'll know that over the course of a breathe, when we start to relax more and the body starts to let go, emotion can start to rise and come to the surface. And if we think about the layers coming inwards, we've moved from the mind to the physical and breaking down the physical barriers. And then we move from the physical into the emotional layer, starting to feel what's underneath. And then the more we repeat this process, we get to come back to this core, which is love and joy and expression and freedom and all of these amazing ways of being in our lives. And to bring it back to our tiered system for breathwork, conscious connected breathwork as a balancing practice is a way to help come back to ourselves, to help come back to that core of love and joy. And over the past year in particular, as I went deeper into conscious connected breathwork, trained as a facilitator, my body has had this like revival, this renewal, where a lot of the physical tension, well, if we go one layer outside of that, a lot of the overthinking and the rumination started to settle. I found that I wasn't in my mind as much anymore. Then the physical tension started to soften as well. I used to get so tight around my neck, my shoulders, my back, my hips. That has started to soften over the last year or so, which is amazing because I had to give up playing sport for like 3 years, constantly going to physios. I got surgery on my hip, which I mentioned in the first podcast, and thought that I'd never play sport again or never be even able to run again. I'm actually running the Dublin Marathon this year, and it's something that I wrote down as a goal for the last like 4 years in a row, and it just never felt like it would be possible. Like I couldn't run without getting serious pain in my body. And thankfully that has softened more and more as I've breathed deeper and expressed more through the breath, through getting to this place of love and joy. But that's where the physical started to soften. And then when the physical started to soften, I started to meet all these emotions that I hadn't felt safe to feel in the past. And the breath just breaks us down in that way. We don't actually realize the emotion is coming to the surface until we're in it already. And there might be tears, or there might be laughter, or there might be shaking, like physical sensations in the body that come through. And all of these things are signs that the emotion is starting to actually move through the body now. If we think about emotion, as I mentioned earlier, as energy in motion, if that energy is nowhere to go, it just gets stuck and held in the body. Whereas when we start to breathe in a conscious, connected way, we start to move and shift that energy. We breathe through that energy. It moves around the body. And then afterwards, we feel lighter, we feel calmer, we feel more at peace because we've allowed that energy to move that hasn't moved for so long in the past. So that's our emotional layer. And then the more we move through this practice, the more we get to come back to this love and joy and expression, which is in the center. Now, it's not a case of I go from here to here to here and then I stay here. We're constantly moving through these levels in our lives. But even just to have an awareness of that is incredibly powerful because it gives you a sense of not feeling powerless with whatever is happening in your life. So for example, if you're constantly overthinking and you can't switch off what's happening up here, knowing that there are practices, body-based practices like breath work that can help you to quieten this, that can help you to release physical tension in your body, that can help you to integrate your emotions so that you feel more you day to day, is incredibly empowering. And that was one of the huge themes across the course of last year for me and for the people I trained with, and the conversations that we had, is how empowering this practice is. Because I've got a bird here chirping. Because you start to feel like more you again. And I say again because when we're young, we have a pretty good sense of who we are. We're just these like expressive beings that speak up for our needs. We cry when we want to cry. We laugh when we want to laugh. The world looks and feels like so amazing. And then as we start to move through life and we pick up on all these messages and ways of being, and we go to school and who we are in our community and our culture and our family, we start to close off from certain parts of ourselves. And that makes sense, because to stay safe in this world, we need to stay in connection with others. So we will show up in particular ways to stay in connection. And if you listen to episode 1, you will know that that was a big part of my story, was thinking that I needed to show up as this like hyper masculine, sporty, attractive teenager or guy in his 20s, and it made my world feel so small. And the breath has helped me to break down all of these layers to come back to who I actually want to be in this world. It's given me the confidence to show up more fully as myself. And when I say like showing up more fully as myself, I mean the Owen who is expressive, who tells people how he feels, who isn't afraid to set a boundary, who isn't afraid to spend time by himself, who leans into playing music more, which is something that I rejected, who deeply loves the people around him and isn't afraid to let them know. Now, this isn't always the case, and sometimes I do kind of go back into my shell, but for the most part, I am becoming the person who I always was when I was young and who I lost along the way. I'm coming back to that version of myself, and the breath has helped me to do that. So I guess that's a little introduction into where breathwork has fit into my life. For the last part of this podcast, I want to give you some practical tools, knowledge, entry points into how the breath can be impactful for you. And the way I explain that to the clients that I work with, the one-to-ones, the groups, is through the more macro, the bigger experiences, and the more micro or smaller day-to-day experiences. I picked this up from a breathworker in the space, Jamie Clements is his name, and I really resonated with that idea that yes, the bigger experiences are incredibly powerful. The conscious connected breathwork, the hour and a half long facilitations that I hold, those are very much centered around emotional integration, allowing feeling to return, breaking down that muscular tension, coming back to who we are underneath all the noise. Because in those macro breathes, all of these insights start to pop up when we quieten the mind and come into the body, like stories that we used to tell ourselves that actually aren't true at all, ways of fitting in that actually don't serve us anymore, people in our lives that actually don't serve us anymore. All of these things that when we're stuck in the busyness of day-to-day life, we can't get this bird's eye view of. But when we breathe in a conscious, connected way, all of these insights start to pop up about who we actually want to be. I had a breathe a couple of weeks ago with a client, and afterwards he said that he's so grateful for his family, and he wanted to just go and tell them that afterwards and spend more time with them and make an effort. And this insight came up because he took the time to breathe in a conscious, connected way. I thought it was beautiful and worth sharing here. Those are the more macro experiences, the deeper, more energizing experiences, and they are incredibly powerful. And I recommend that if you are interested in those, that you find spaces where you can be held in that way, because those aren't experiences that you would do by yourself. It's important to have a trained facilitator there, because to be able to bring you to that depth in yourself, it's very important that a facilitator has done that work themselves, number one. And also, there are different health contraindications, considerations as well to engage in these practices. For example, if you are on certain types of antidepressants or medication for different psychoses. Conscious connected breathwork may not be safe for you. If you're pregnant, for example, conscious connected breathwork may not be safe. So there are a lot of different contraindications that mean that it's important to approach this macro in the right way. But that's one side of the spectrum with breathwork. And as a way to get into breathwork more on the day-to-day side around like regulation, stress management, reducing anxiety, this is where we start with the micro. And it's as simple as, if we come back to the very beginning of this podcast, breath awareness. Checking in on how your breath is day to day. So for example, I'll give you some context around where I started with this. I started working online for myself about 3 years ago, and for the first probably 2 years of that, I had no awareness of how my breath, how my body was when I was working on my laptop. And what was happening is I essentially was barely breathing. I'd be so tense and hunched over and focused on my work that I'd barely breathe. And it's no wonder that all of this would tighten up, that I would be so stressed during and after work, because if we think about that 12 to 20 breaths per minute, like my breathing was so fast and shallow that I was breathing loads. I was taking lots of breaths, but they were so shallow and so tensed that I was breathing my way into a state of stress. So sorry, when I said that I was barely breathing, I was breathing actually a lot, but there wasn't much breath coming in. It was these like sharp, shallow breaths. And that accumulated over time, and I got more and more tensed up and stressed. And the reason I say that is because that's common for so many people. We have no awareness of how our breath is when we're at work, for example. So that's the first place we start. Set a reminder on your phone for every 30 minutes or every hour for a week. And every time that timer goes off, I want you to check in and see how your breath is. Is it long or is it short? Is it deep or is it shallow? Is it slow or is it fast? Where is the breath going to in your body? Really great place to start. And then when we have more of an awareness on how our breath is, we can start to build in these conscious practices day to day that help us to shift our state or change our state. Best place to begin is coherent breathing. So 5 seconds in through the nose, 5 seconds out through the nose. And that can be a practice done for 1 minute or for 5 minutes or for 15 minutes. However much or little time you have, you don't need to have this specific time allocation for these breath practices. You can dip into these if and when needed. I don't have specific routines around my daily practices, but I will find space definitely once every day, usually twice, sometimes 3 times, to breathe in different ways. Coherent breathing is my go-to. It's like 5 seconds in through the nose, 5 seconds out through the nose, or sometimes 5 seconds in through the nose, 5 seconds out through the mouth is something I like as well. Sometimes my nose gets quite blocked and it's hard to exhale through my nose. So coherent breathing is definitely the go-to one for me. Other practices like 4-7-8 breathing can be really beneficial just before bed. So if we think about the extended exhale and the effect that that has on our nervous system in terms of calming us down, breathing in for 4, holding for 7, and then out for 8 for 5 minutes before bed has been clinically proven to improve the quality of your sleep. And we all know what a good night's sleep does for other areas of our lives, the energy that we get from having a good night's sleep. Sleep is a big part of the work that I do with my one-to-ones and groups, and we come at it from, well, if we think about it as a 24-hour cycle and all the ways that we can shape our lives to improve the quality of our sleep, it starts with the breath for me. Before bed, 4-7-8 breathing, for example, to downregulate the nervous system, staying away from screens for 2 hours before bed, trying not to eat 2 hours before bed to make sure our digestive system isn't in use when we're trying to sleep. We sleep well, we have a good night's sleep, we have more energy throughout our day then, eating good quality foods, hydrating well, exercising, adding in our breathwork practices, managing our stress levels. These are all brilliant ways to sleep better. And when you sleep better, your world starts to change. This is a little bit of a segue, I guess it's ciorcal conversations. But I felt like that was worth adding in there, just breathwork around sleep. And this idea, which I love, which is bookending your day. It's where I get most of my one-to-one clients to start, is with a breath practice at the start of the day and a breath practice at the end of the day, like a bookend. First thing or around first thing in the morning, 5 minutes of coherent breathing can be really nice. And then one of the last things you do before bed, 5 to 10 minutes of 4-7-8 breathing. Both really, really good places to start. And on my Insight timer, I have loads of different breath practices that you can try out. Coherent breathing is there. I'm recording 4-7-8 at the moment to pop up there. Other practices that are on there that can be beneficial for your day-to-day life include Yoga Nidra, which is a 15-minute body scan, which helps you to check in with different parts of your body, release tension, bring calm into your body, which is, again, great before sleep, but can be done at any time throughout the day. Box breathing is a balancing breath. So that's a nice one before a meeting, for example, let's say a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting, to do a couple of minutes of 4 seconds in, 4-second hold, 4 seconds out, 4-second hold, as a way to balance your nervous system. We're not trying to like bring deep calm, because you need energy to be efficient and be focused in a meeting, for example. So that's where the box breathing can fit in really well throughout your day. And then if we think about what an optimal day of good quality breathing might look like, you wake up in the morning, you might do a couple of minutes of coherent breathing. Throughout the day, you bring that breath awareness, so checking in on how your breath is. Before a meeting, you might do a couple of minutes of box breathing. During the meeting, you breathe in and out through your nose, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, because that's just our way of breathing throughout our day anyways. Last thing before bed, you might do some 4-7-8 breathing to downregulate the nervous system. And that might sound like a lot now, but as you start to build that into your routine, it becomes second nature. And I can speak from my own personal experience there, and also the people that I work with that stick with this practice. It just becomes part of who they are. It's not this thing that they need to do all the time. The breath is part of their way of being. And I mentioned that in my own context at the start, that the breath is so much more than just these tools. The breath shapes how you show up in your day-to-day life. If you're showing up for yourself and the people around you through that short practice in the morning, through breathing in and out through your nose, through doing some box breathing in stressful situations, it is a different version of you that is showing up in that meeting, in your relationship, for yourself. It's a more present version of yourself. It's a calmer version of yourself. And who in this world that's becoming more and more disconnected and stressed wouldn't want to be calmer and more present and feel more like themselves? It's one of the things I find most difficult nowadays, is when I'm dysregulated and out of that space, because I know how good it feels. And thankfully, I spend a lot of my time there, and a lot of it comes down to a couple of things. I'm not going to say it's just breath work, but breath work is a big part of that. Those practices that I mentioned. Time in nature is another huge one, because it's deeply regulating for our nervous system. When we're outside, our perceived sense of safety increases because of the nature around us, because of the trees, because of the birds, because of the sun, because of the rain, the wind. We feel safer in our bodies compared to when we're inside or when we're surrounded by buildings. So that's another huge one. The breath, nature, time in connection with people who you feel fully yourself around is also a huge one that gets so often overlooked. And in a world that's becoming more disconnected, we spend more time by ourselves. Finding people who you can show up fully around is so important. But the caveat with that is, you need to know who you are to be able to express fully and be around others and be that person around them. And that kind of comes back to the breath, where it's like, well, who am I in the first place? How do I want to be? Those more macro experiences, the conscious connected breath work, helps us to meet that version of ourselves. It gives us the confidence to be who we want to be. And then we can find other people who are more in alignment with who we are. And that's incredibly regulating for our nervous system. That adds more meaning to life. So if we think about the breath, time in nature, time around others who we feel fully ourselves around, exercise is also a huge one. It's incredibly grounding for our body to increase our heart rate, increase blood flow, to push ourselves. It also builds resilience. It builds confidence in ourselves. regardless of what type of exercise it is, we should all be engaging in multiple forms of exercise multiple times a week. That's a really big one that I was kind of too deep in to recognize, and was very much driven by ego with exercise when I got into it first, and then kind of pulled away from it completely. Well, was forced to with all the physical tension, but have now come back to it and have a much more positive relationship with it, where I exercise because I know how good it is for me, I know how good it makes me feel, and in turn that has a positive effect on how I look physically as well, in terms of building muscle and feeling better in my clothes. So that's the next one. Is there one more? Yeah, I want to touch on food as well, the quality of our food. When we do conscious connected breathwork, we're essentially detoxifying our body, and we want to stay as close to that state as possible. And all these hyper palatable, highly processed foods, they're really just not good for our bodies. They reduce our energy because they take longer to process. They're not good for our skin. They're not good for our gut, which is also known as the second brain. I think it's nice the way that all of these practices go hand in hand. When you exercise regularly, you're more likely to eat good quality foods. When you do a conscious connected breathwork session and the facilitator tells you that it's helpful to hydrate well, to spend time in nature, and to eat good quality foods afterwards, you're also more likely to lean into those other healthy habits. You'll see that they all feed into one another. I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but I feel like a lot of that was relevant to say in the context of the wider points around breathwork, which, again, coming back to what I said at the beginning, is around ways of being, healthier ways of being, more conscious ways of being. And it's taken me all this time to mention that word, conscious, but I feel like it's a nice place to end, because I have come to this idea over the last year and a half, 2 years, of living more consciously. And what that means to me is being more mindful of who I am in this world and the impact that I have in this world, the impact I have on other people, the impact I have on the environment. And the breath helps us to be more conscious. Through the daily practice, the more micro practices, through the conscious connected breathwork, the more longer practices, and combining these two, it helps us to lead more conscious lives. And what living more consciously does is it gives us choice. We don't feel like our lives are being lived outside of us. We feel like we're in control of our own lives. It's like life isn't happening to us anymore. We're not reactive to life. We're more proactive to life. We have more sovereignty, more autonomy over the lives that we want to live. And the breath can give us that. The breath has given me that. It gives the people I work with that. And you might, hopefully, by the end of this podcast, start to piece together why breathwork is more than just these practices that you might see on Instagram Reels. This practice has the potential to completely change the course of your life, and I'm living proof of that. This isn't me saying that life is always easy. It's not. It's incredibly stressful a lot of the time. But my capacity to deal with that stress has drastically increased, because when you're living a life that's more in alignment with you, first of all, you have more energy. Secondly, your capacity to deal with the shit that gets thrown at you increases, because you have more certainty in yourself, in your direction. I think that's so, so important to mention. Oh, as you can probably tell, I'm really passionate about this topic, this practice, this way of being. Yeah. If you are interested in trying out breathwork, I'd start with the daily practices, but also try and get booked in for a conscious connected breathwork facilitation. If it's even in a group or a one-to-one, I think it's helpful for everyone to try it at least a couple of times. And it's not for everyone. You might come to conscious connected breathwork and feel like it's actually not for you, and that's fine. It's not my place to push it on anyone. But if you are curious about it, I think it's worth exploring. Typically with conscious connected breathwork, we'll do that style once every 2 weeks is a nice flow with the more macro experience. And then the daily practice, it's literally as often as you feel like is relevant for you. Key takeaways: breathe in and out through your nose, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. That is our way of breathing day to day. Breath awareness, checking in on how your breath is a huge part of engaging in breath work. Conscious breathing are all of our different tools, our different types of breath work that we can use. Conscious connected is the longer one, the more macro practice that I facilitate. The shorter daily practices: box breathing, coherent breathing, 4-7-8, yoga nidra, Wim Hof, breath of fire. And then underpinning all of that kind of more like cognitive stuff is the way of being. I'm going to finish with the quote that I read out at the start by Alexander Lowen. A person who doesn't breathe deeply reduces the life of their body. If they don't move freely, they restrict the life of their body. And if their self-expression is constricted, they reduce the life of their body. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, please feel free to leave a comment or drop a like or save the episode, share it with a friend. It's been amazing to hear the feedback from people over the last couple of weeks since Conversations launched. It's something I'm really passionate about and it comes quite easy to me. So thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Have a great day. Have a great week. And if you are interested in trying out breathwork, you know where to find me. Instagram. You can fill out the link through my bio or drop me a message and I'd be more than happy to introduce you to this practice. Cheers.